Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in fear when he realized it was Lu Shang. Lu Shang's figure was flying near the ship and his body was surrounded by purple martial energy. Cumberland deactivated his powers, releasing Snowy. She fell to the ground, put her hand over her chest, and began gasping heavily. Cumberland's attention fixed on Lu Shang and his eyes started to shine with hatred. He clenched his teeth and fist tightly. He knew that the appearance of the human figure was that of Lu Shang, but the sensation it transmitted was not that of a real body, but rather an illusion. When thinking deeply, his eyes widened in fear, realizing that it was an avatar of spiritual energy of Lu Shang. While he was distracted, the clone of Lu Shang began to advance towards him with a serene gaze. Upon feeling the energy of the clone, Cumberland panicked, not knowing what to do. Just before Cumberland had time to react, the clone attacked with a fierce burst of energy, which struck directly against Cumberland's body. The attack was so powerful that the burst of energy left the ship and traveled hundreds of meters over the water. Lu Shang's clone concentrated his martial energy into his fist and struck Cumberland in the chest. Seeing this, Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. At that moment, Lu Shang's attack caused Cumberland's soul to leave his body. The attention of all the martial saints focused on Cumberland's soul, and their eyes widened in terror, putting them on alert. They could not believe that with a single blow, Lu Shang's spiritual energy clone had pulled Cumberland's soul out of his body, which was practically the same as being dead. Cumberland's soul began to ascend toward heaven. With a worried gaze he begged the guide to save him. The guide started to gaze at the ground in silence, lost in thought. He decided not to stand idly by watching one of his subordinates die, so using his power, he moved one of his fingers. The guide's energy made Cumberland's soul stop ascending to heaven and start returning to its original body. Upon noticing that he was not going to die, Cumberland's eyes began to shine with joy. The soul of the martial saint entered back into his body, and he could not help but clench his fists tightly and feel relieved knowing that he had not died. He put his hand over his chest and his eyes widened in terror since he could not believe that his soul had returned to his body. The attention of the other martial saints was fixed on Lu Shang's clone, and with faces full of fear, they began to retreat. Cumberland revealed that Lu Shang's strength had increased again. Now he could even dominate the martial souls of life and death, so their so-called 9th level divine bodies were nothing compared to Lu Shang's power. Lu Shang's clone clenched his fist and prepared to attack again. Cumberland hid behind the guide. The guide started looking at the ground and thought it was no wonder that the 9th level warriors of this planet were like toys for Lu Shang. He couldn't help but praise him. While the body of Lu Shang's clone was releasing martial energy, our boy's attention focused on the guide. With an arrogant smile, he asked if he was the guide everyone talked about. The guide did not even look him in the eyes and could not avoid feeling somewhat confused. The clone appeared in front of the guide, and while his eyes were shining with rage, he began to gather the power of the immortal cells in his fist and asked the guide to try to block his attack. The clone's fist began to emit a powerful martial energy, and when the guide raised his head, the fist was already centimeters away. Instead of panicking, the guide remained calm, raised his hand, and decided it was time to get serious. Then, the guide touched the forehead of the clone with one finger, causing his energy to enter into his head. Upon feeling the energy of the guide, the eyes of the clone began to shine with confusion. The energy of the guide began to spin rapidly, forming a small tornado around them. The power of the guide was so strong that the bodies of the martial saints were thrown into the air. No one was able to withstand it. Lu Shang's clone decided not to give up, and with a determined gaze began to strike with a chain of punches. With a calm expression, using only one hand, the guide blocked the attacks of the clone. But the clone decided to attack by surprise, yet without much effort, the guide again blocked his attacks. The clone concentrated his martial power in his fist, causing martial fire to emerge from his body. Without losing another second, the clone attacked again with all his strength, but as expected, the guide did not have much difficulty blocking the punches. Now that the clone had his guard down, the guide decided to counterattack with a powerful punch. The clone's attention was fixed on the fist and his eyes widened in surprise. The guide struck the clone in the chest, making his body retreat several meters. The guide began to observe him and with a smile mocked him by asking if this was all he had and advised him to surrender. The clone put his hand on his chest and with a confident smile revealed that he was just finishing warming up. At that moment, a tornado began to form in the middle of the sea near the yacht, and a powerful martial energy started to emerge from it. Not long after, Lu Shang emerged from the tornado and began to advance towards the yacht. The attention of our boy was fixed on the guide, and his eyes started to shine with seriousness. The image of when he was in front of the eye that was watching him from within the rift appeared in Lu Shang's mind. Now he had no doubt that the guide was that being who had given Zhao Jai the deadly technique. The guide began to gaze towards the ground and did not say a single word. With a serious expression, Lu Shang used his power and pulled Snowy out of the yacht. He began to stare at the guide and gave Snowy the order to flee first. With a serene gaze, he questioned whether the guide's objective was the energy crystals. Upon hearing this, a smile spread across the guide's face, revealing that Lu Shang only had to give him 400 kilograms of energy crystals, and in exchange he would not kill him. And in that way Lu Shang would continue being the only one at the top. While Lu Shang's body was emitting a suffocating martial energy, he descended elegantly onto the yacht right in front of the guide. The guide and the others began to observe him in silence. The attention of the martial saints was fixed on the guide. The eyes of the martial saint who had a scar on his eye were filled with confusion, since he could not believe that the guide was not bothered by Lu Shang's arrogant attitude. The guide had not said a single word about breaking the rules, and moreover seemed to admire Lu Shang. The other martial saint clenched his teeth and could not help but feel furious, since now all of them were going to be eternally condemned to be inferior to Lu Shang. With a calm gaze, Lu Shang revealed that he had never been in the habit of being convinced with just a few words. He began to point at the guide with his finger and with an arrogant expression said that if he managed to kill him, all of the energy crystals would be his. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the martial saints widened in surprise and their jaws dropped, while on the other side, Cumberland began to sweat like crazy. He started to observe Lu Shang and his eyes expanded in fear, realizing that Lu Shang was crazy. The very guide was being reasonable. He had even made concessions. Not only was he going to forgive Lu Shang for what had happened, but also only wanted 400 kilograms of energy crystals, which was not even 10% of what the rules dictated. He was dumbfounded, since the guide had made him a very generous offer, but still Lu Shang was mocking him. Upon hearing Lu Shang's words, the guide's eyes widened in surprise, since no one had ever rejected his offer before. With a curious gaze, he asked if Lu Shang was sure. Our boy began to stare at him intently with a confident expression and could not help but smile. Lu Shang closed his eyes and with an arrogant expression asked if the guide's martial art was that of a baby. He could not believe that even for fighting he was so fearful. The guide's attention fixed on Lu Shang and his eyes widened in confusion, leaving him in shock. Lu Shang continued mocking him and asked if he practiced martial arts for fools. The voice of our boy spread everywhere. The guide began to lose control and the yacht started to shake. Our boy called him a fool and his words were like a stone falling on his head. The guide began to gaze towards the ground in silence, not knowing what to do. The martial saints began to move away and their faces were filled with sweat and fear, since they could not believe that Lu Shang had dared to insult the guide. For people from a culturally inferior planet, it was like insulting a divine figure, and even so Lu Shang pointed at the guide and called him a fool. The guide clenched his teeth tightly, and while his body was releasing a suffocating energy, he made it clear that he was no fool. He was so furious that he clenched his fists and veins began to form all over his body. Somewhere else on the planet there was a volcano. The power of the guide caused that volcano to erupt. Somewhere else there were two men fishing in the sea. The sky filled with black clouds and it started to thunder. The attention of the men fixed on them and their eyes filled with confusion. Without hesitating for a second, the two men knelt down and with their bodies trembling, they began to beg for mercy. Believing that the Sea Dragon King had become angry, they decided to plead for it to be calmed. Cumberland's attention was fixed on the clouds and his jaw dropped in fear. He knew that a level 9 warrior could communicate with heaven and earth, but causing such a vast change in the natural order with just one thought was impossible. He knew that this already surpassed the level of a powerful being from a single planet. Realizing that the guide had reached stellar level, Snowy, who was moving away from the yacht, placed her hand over her chest and began to observe the thunder. Her eyes filled with worry as she did not know if Lu Shang would be alright. The guide extended his hands and began to fly, causing his body to start releasing an intense evil energy. The martial saints went into shock, while Lu Shang's eyes were shining with joy. With an arrogant smile, he once again called the guide a fool and asked if that was all. The guide started staring at Lu Shang and with a furious gaze made it clear that a fool like him deserved to be punished. Using all his power, the guide moved like thunder and in the blink of an eye appeared in front of Lu Shang. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. The guide stood in front of Lu Shang and began to concentrate his power in his fingers. Lu Shang's attention was fixed on his fingers and his mind filled with confusion since he did not know what the guide had in mind. The guide moved quickly and struck Lu Shang hard in the chest with the technique called impact. Upon feeling this, Lu Shang's eyes widened in surprise. The guide's evil energy began to enter Lu Shang's body, expelling his martial energy. His eyes turned white and he began to scream in agony. The martial saints began to observe Lu Shang closely and could not help but sweat when they realized that this was the power of a level 10 warrior, even the pinnacle of the human world. Lu Shang, under the guide's power, did not have the slightest chance to resist. They thought he was going to be crushed in an instant and reduced to a mass of flesh. While the guide's hand was releasing an intense energy with a furious expression, he called Lu Shang foolish and revealed that now he would understand the difference in power between them. The guide's energy entered Lu Shang's body, burning him as if he were coal. Lu Shang began to observe the guide, and while his eyes were shining with confidence, he started smiling, let out a sigh, praised the guide and mocked him by saying that now he was starting to believe that he wasn't weak after all.